Hi, everyone. I'll begin the presentation now. I'm Baxter Hankin, and this is my thesis project, 15th Ward North, a neighborhood designed to reconnect Syracuse. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to begin by going through a roadmap of this project presentation. First, I'm going to start with this thesis contention and discussing that, which is more about the theoretical side of the project. And then I will talk about some of the research on the 15th Ward North neighborhood in Syracuse. After that, I'll delve into the architectural concepts and zoning behind this project. And then I'll finally arrive at the ideas of phasing of new development over time and the design of this neighborhood. After that, I'll take a few questions before I play a 17-minute long walkthrough video of the neighborhood. And then after that, I will take more questions and continue the discussion of the project. More information on this thesis, including the walkthrough video, is available at my website, which also includes the most in-depth exploration of my thesis in the form of a thesis document. And later on, this presentation will most likely be uploaded here as well. So starting with my thesis contention, this thesis argues in favor of walkability, which is a condition that allows for interesting and useful walks on a daily basis. And it's created from a mix of top-down civic planning and bottom-up, unimposing grassroots development of mixed-use buildings for residential, retail, office, and other purposes. We need walkability for a better human experience, sustainability, and connectivity. I focus on a series of practical techniques to create walkability, such as concerns of physically walkable infrastructure, dense mixed-use development, socioeconomic equity, building upon pre-existing local identity, and fine-grained incremental development. I also focus on two main architectural techniques, parallax and the picturesque, while walking when things that are closer to you appear to move faster past you than do objects in the distance. That's parallax. When visual uniqueness and irregularity create interesting framed views for the pedestrian, that's the picturesque. These techniques are important to make the city more interesting to the pedestrian and to draw visual emphasis to important places in the neighborhood. As a result, a city designed with these strategies is more enjoyable, in which people walk because they want to, not just because they have to. Therefore, a city designed in this way is more vibrant, safe, and walkable. Throughout this thesis celebrates walkable cities as equitable places where all sorts of people can coexist and interact with each other in a way that complements our sociable human nature in an interdependent, diverse social structure with a sustainable lifestyle in a place that provides greater opportunities for all. And I've applied these ideas to this neighborhood in Syracuse, which is the 15th Ward North. The borders of this neighborhood are roughly defined as I-690 in the north, in the south, East Genesee Street, in the west, State Street, and in the east, University Avenue. The site contains a lot of history. It was Syracuse's segregated Jewish and Black neighborhood, and as America's cities declined post-1920s, Syracuse followed this trend. Through redlining and white flight, the 15th Ward declined. The neighborhood, including much of the site of this thesis project, became a target for slum clearance. This situation was worsened by the construction of I-81 through the neighborhood's center, which displaced more people, demolished more structures, and divided an already devastated neighborhood. Today, the scars of urban renewal are still visible here. Beyond East Genesee Street, the neighborhood contains vacant lots and parking. Despite its central location, halfway between downtown and University Hill, and a 20-minute walk in either direction, much of this place is a barren hole in the city. As the removal of I-81 is likely in the near future, the northern 15th Ward can once again tie together the city of Syracuse. This project seeks to create a framework for how this neighborhood should be positively redeveloped, reuniting eastern downtown and the western part of the Near East Side. So I'm going to start by looking into the research I've done on the 15th Ward North neighborhood, and that sort of begins looking back in time before the urban renewal of the 15th Ward. And here you see a neighborhood that's very well connected without many vacant lots, where you can even tell where the locations of the streets were by where the edges of the buildings are, which shows that the neighborhood was very complete without any major gaps in the urban fabric. And through urban renewal and neglect and the construction of I-81, we've come to this condition today here where things are very spaced out and disconnected. And as a result, the neighborhood has become quite unwalkable. And you see a similar condition between the past of the neighborhood and the present of the neighborhood in this drawing and the one after this. This drawing is showing the 1950s condition of the area through photographs that represent the memory of the area, as well as place markers of some of the important local businesses. And I've done this same thing to represent the neighborhood as it exists today. And today we see this neighborhood with also many important local features that give the place a sense of identity, but they don't really operate the way that they could as successfully as they could, due to the fact that there's many vacant lots and empty lots in between them. And it's also important in this thesis to understand the major stakeholders in the neighborhood. So this map here shows who are the most important stakeholders in order for this neighborhood to be further developed and really become a complete community. And in this case, it's Upstate Medical University, Syracuse University, and various governments, including city, county, and state governments. The 15th Ward North neighborhood is uniquely situated to become a walkable, complete community within Syracuse, tying it together because of its location. It sits right at the middle of the connective corridor bus loop and right in the middle of Syracuse's many institutions. And this makes it not only ideal for a walkable neighborhood, but also a necessary location for one to tie together the rest of the neighborhoods of the city, which have been very separated and fragmented by the many parking lots and vacant lots, decreasing interconnectivity that exists within this neighborhood's boundaries. And this project is possible in part due to the city's changes in land use. And on the left here, we see the current condition in land use, which shows that individual lots in the city of Syracuse are designated as specific uses. And on the right, we see the new land use plan for the city, where instead neighborhoods are more or less defined by, as a whole, by how dense they should be, what their setbacks should be like, things like that, that really allow a neighborhood like this one to become denser and more cohesive with less zoning barriers in the way of that. And another important piece of the neighborhood and its history is the Kennedy Square housing development, which used to exist in the heart of this neighborhood here. And that was a public-private partnership, low-income housing development, and it was torn down about 10 years ago. And there was a plan shown below here to develop the area, which fell through. And this thesis uses this site as part of its larger site to develop a new main public square for the area. Another important factor that this thesis considers is the community grid design for the I-81 project by the State Department of Transportation, in which the state is recommending that the I-81 viaduct that cuts through the neighborhood, shown on the top left here, be torn down and sort of created into a ground level street that better connects into the city's grid without creating barriers as the viaduct does now. Throughout my research process, I also conducted many interviews of people in the neighborhood and local businesses and other important stakeholders. And I asked a variety of questions shown on the left here, and some of the people I interviewed are shown on the right here. And throughout this interview process, on the left, you see the things that people wanted to see in the neighborhood that I've tried to incorporate as much as I possibly could into my design for this thesis. And on the right, you see other common responses. And here there's a variety of other responses I received as well. And throughout all this, I really tried to take this feedback and make it a part of my thesis design work as much as I could. And moving on from the research of the 15th Ward North, I'm moving into the architectural concepts about the neighborhood. And I start with this one, which is called parallax. And this is really about making spaces that are irregularly shaped instead of a very rigid grid. And the reason I do this is both to emphasize the importance of civic spaces in the neighborhood, such as through views like the one here in the top right, and also to create a sense of discovery, constant discovery as the pedestrian moves through the space. And that keeps the pedestrian interested as they continue walking through the space. And another factor that keeps the pedestrian interested as they walk through the neighborhood is creating a lot of uniqueness and identifiability between the different buildings that would be newly developed in the area. And in addition to that, looking at the building details at a smaller scale is also important to keep the pedestrian constantly interested, approaching many irregular and new building details as they walk through the neighborhood, to keep them interested in walking through, not just with the sense that they need to walk through the neighborhood to get there, but also enjoying it and seeing it as a form of leisure, leading to a more vibrant and used neighborhood. Another important factor for creating walkability in this neighborhood is what I'm calling walkable district interconnectivity. And on the left, you see a diagram I've created of the current condition in Syracuse, where you have two main pockets of walkability, which I'm looking at as downtown and University Hill. And between those are both the I-81 viaduct and multiple car-oriented areas of the city that really prevent a larger walkable center for Syracuse. But with the I-81 viaduct coming down, most likely, and with my thesis design, in addition to the Blueprint 15 project, which is an ongoing development happening in Syracuse, the city can be more connected through these four districts into a much larger central walkable area that becomes, that turns Syracuse into a car optional city, improving quality of life for all in and around the city center. And sort of going back to the aesthetics of the city for those walking around it, I've also included this drawing to show throughout my design many irregular and interesting compositions that are very unique that I've created between buildings. And what I'm trying to do here is to create uniqueness throughout all of the different areas of the neighborhood to keep the pedestrian constantly interested and to create a sense of local identity and civic pride and enjoyment in the neighborhood. And I also do that to keep the pedestrian constantly interested through various scales of building details. And this diagram here is showing that as you move closer and closer to a building that's very detailed on its exterior, you discover new smaller details as you get closer to it. Whereas with a more generic and bland building, as I show in the center, your perception of it stays the same from far away and close up. So I would prefer and promote the example on the left, as something that keeps the pedestrian intrigued and interested and proud of their neighborhood as they're walking through it. And another way to keep the pedestrian intrigued, as well as to create social and economic equity, is through fine-grainedness. And I contrast here between coarse-grained blocks and fine-grained urban blocks. So at the top, you see a building that takes up the width of an entire city block. And as you walk along that block, there's only one possible destination, and there's only one thing for you to look at. Below, there's a very similar density overall, but there are 6 different smaller buildings that are more destinations you can go to along your walk and more things to look at. This keeps things interesting. It makes the city more vibrant and diverse and well used at all times of the day. And it also increases the diversity of ownership and usership of the neighborhood, as well as decreasing the cost of entry for owners of properties, which helps to keep the new development in the neighborhood local. And all of this improves the quality of life in the neighborhood. A more practical sense of improving the walkability in the neighborhood is at the scale of physical infrastructure. And here above, we see an existing condition diagrammed in Syracuse, where the street is quite wide and is surrounded by vacant lots on both sides. And what I've done below is I've narrowed the street, given back some space to the sidewalks, added street trees, and I've lined both sides of the sidewalks with new buildings to activate the vibrancy of those sidewalks. And now from there, I move on into the form-based code of the neighborhood. And this is sort of about zoning generic shapes of how things would be laid out in the city in order to create a better pedestrian experience and more enjoyable and resilient neighborhood. So what we see here are a variety of different characteristics labeled and given dimensions that would improve the pedestrian experience in the neighborhood for both blocks and streets. And I sort of delve into that a bit more with a series of plans and sections that are called out in this drawing here. So I start with a series of 3 intersection plans shown here. On the left, we see an intersection with the Almond Street corridor created by the community grid design for I-81. This is designed by the State Department of Transportation. In the middle is my design for most of the new neighborhood streets, which are optimized for better pedestrian use. And on the right, we see an intersection with 3 of those streets I've designed. And at the top, there is the widened northern portion of Irving Avenue, also designed by the community grid design by the State Department of Transportation for access to a new exit and entrance to I-690 now that the I-81 viaduct no longer connects to it. And in those drawings, you may have seen these parklets inserted into some of the parallel parking lanes, such as you see on the corner of this drawing if you look to the left where my cursor is. And these are micro public spaces that are the size of 1 parallel parking space, occasionally inserted into that parallel parking lane and faced towards the sidewalk to better activate the use of that sidewalk. And these are just some possible configurations of those for a variety of uses to keep the city vibrant. And those 3 plans that I just showed are sort of reflected in these 3 sections here. So here's at the Almond Street corridor. Here's the condition of a typical neighborhood street that I've designed. And then here's the widened northern portion of Irving Avenue. And in addition to these, I've also explored a wide variety of different unique conditions of both public spaces and also streets that I've designed throughout this project to really turn this into a more complete community and a more pedestrian-friendly one. And the next topic I would like to delve into is imageability, and this is all about creating better identity and navigability and civic pride for the community. And this sort of starts with looking at the successes of what we already have here in Syracuse with some of the existing buildings and what they've done right and why they've succeeded, and taking those and using those as examples for new development in the city. And I sort of do that through the idea of civic imageability here, which is looking at two different realms of the city, the civic realm being the one of the more monumental architecture and public spaces of the neighborhood that that really are identifiable in the city and give the identity to the neighborhood. And then from there, those can't operate without a more generic context of mixed use residential and commercial buildings around them. And this is what we're really lacking now, as the existing monumental buildings in the neighborhood, of which there are some, such as the Center of Excellence and the former Syracuse Central train station, lose some of their effect by sitting within a sea of parking lots and vacant lots. And together, those two different parts of the city come together into a better city for everyone in a more interconnected and useful neighborhood. And from there, another way to look at that is this map, which basically depicts the same thing of distilling the neighborhood down to its most imageable and identifiable elements for the neighborhood. And on this map is a series of numbers that correspond to these views below. Some of these views are existing views that remain in and around the neighborhood, and some of them are newly designed by this thesis, and these coexist and work together in my new design for the neighborhood. And now we move on to phasing of development over time. I don't view this neighborhood as something that should be built all at once by one large developer. I view it instead as something that should be developed incrementally over time. And here's an example of the first phase, which is the existing condition of the neighborhood, where you have I-81 running through the area and many vacant lots and parking lots, dividing a lot of what's there. And in the second phase here, I show the State Department of Transportation's community grid redesign for I-81, where they've added in the Almond Street corridor. And in addition to that, they've extended Irving Avenue from this point here at East Fayette Street north, and extended that up to a new entrance and exit to I-690. And from there, this is where my initial design work comes in. And I've redesigned the streets to be more pedestrian friendly, as well as I proposed a first phase of new development along both East Genesee Street and Almond Street, which are the two major existing corridors in the neighborhood. And the next phase is where most of my design effort has gone, along creating a new corridor from downtown and the community grid's newly created canal district, along Washington Street, past the Almond Street corridor, and over to the former site of the Kennedy Square housing development, where there's a new main public square called Market Square. And this connects towards the south to University Hill through both Irving Avenue and South Cross Avenue. As all those new phases of development were occurring, the vacant lots behind those temporarily remained as parking, as the neighborhood isn't quite at the point of being car optional yet. But once we get to this final phase here, we see the rest of the empty lots filled in with new development, as well as a new pedestrian alley linking this neighborhood over to the currently existing but vastly underutilized Ormond Spencer Park. And one way to look at this neighborhood now is at one snapshot in time with no differentiation between the new and old, to really understand how complete and seamless this neighborhood becomes with this new design. But another way to look at it is understanding what this thesis is proposing and understanding what buildings currently exist. So the currently existing buildings are represented here in dark gray, and all the new buildings proposed by this thesis are in light gray. And this additional map that I've created here breaks down the site into 3 main public spaces that I've designed. The first is the Canal Walk in the left. The second is Almond Park in the center. And the third is the Market Square area in the right. And each of those 3 public spaces has a smaller zoomed in plan that points out a series of before and after views. And this first one, the Canal Walk, has one before and after view that's pointed out here. And the Canal Walk links through a mid-block, the 15th Ward North neighborhood, to the newly designed Canal District by the State Department of Transportation's community grid design. And here you see that new public space that's created by this Canal Walk that refers to some of the city's history and past. The next public space district is Almond Park, which exists as a newly designed space right in front of the Center of Excellence. And the path that currently is under the Center of Excellence links down through the next block to this covered walkway area that wraps around a new playground. And at the end of that here is the former AME Zion Church, which is extended across that walkway to the left here. And these 2 buildings together, along with this playground, become the new neighborhood school. And here we're facing away from the Center of Excellence towards the AME Zion Church in the distance. And in this next image, we're on Washington Street facing west towards where the I-81 viaduct currently stands, but that in this design has been removed, and instead is the Almond Street corridor. And in the right, you see the corner of the Center of Excellence. And then in this final image of this sequence of 3, we have the former AME Zion Church, which is renovated and extended, where all of this here becomes the new neighborhood school, with this walk through to the Center of Excellence in the middle that contains a playground. And in the third public space sequence, we have the newly created Market Square on the former site of the Kennedy Square housing development. And looking in from the west on Washington Street, on the left, we see the currently existing Peace Housing building. And on the right, we see the corner of the Upstate Biotech Accelerator. And, and here's where this street ends. And if we walk a little further, we see Market Square in the distance here. And if we look at that same space from the north, from the exit and entrance to I-690 that's newly created in the community grid, this is the view you see when you get off of that exit. And then a little further, once you're in the public square, on the left, you see the new community center building. And on the right, you see a new grocery market building for the neighborhood. In the center are a variety of different uses for the public space, such as seating around a fountain and this column in the distance. And then this view from inside the square looks back to the west. And on the right of this view, you can see an outdoor performance stage, and in the distance, a variety of mixed-use residential commercial buildings. And in the before image here, you see the Crown Plaza Hotel, as well as the Upstate Biotech Accelerator, both still existing in this project, but those have just been obscured by new development that's built in the vacant lots in front of them. And if you look back into the public square, this view is of most of the new community center building I've proposed. The right side is really the more practical side of the community center, and the left side of it is the performing arts wing with its outdoor stage, and also this tower that signifies the importance of this new square. Within the square, you also have this column that has a stepped base that activates the space and gives people a place within the public square to spend time. And in the distance, this alley frames this turret that can draw the pedestrian in through this space, where then just to the left of this turret in the distance is another pedestrian alley that goes 1 block further and leads directly to the currently existing Ormond Spencer Park. And this sequence is designed to improve the usage of that quite underutilized park that currently exists. And in this next view here, we're viewing the Market Building on the right and the new Market Square Tower building in the center along Irving Avenue, its northern portion that's newly added through the community grid design for I-81. And currently that location is the entrance to the parking lot of the Upstate Medical Biotech Accelerator building. And if we take a step back a block, a half block from there, on the left, we see the Upstate Medical Biotech Accelerator building. On the right, we see the Uncommon apartment building, historically known as the Sylvester. And below, we can see both of these buildings, in addition to many new ones and upgraded streetscapes. To the right, here's the Uncommon Apartments building that we still see. And to the left in the distance, you can just see the corner of the Upstate Biotech Accelerator behind some newly developed buildings. In this next space, we're looking back towards Market Square, this time from the southeast. And on the left, we see a smaller breakout public space leading up to Market Square, as well as this new grocery market building for the neighborhood. And this view is looking just in the opposite direction, southeast towards South Crouse Avenue and East Fayette Street. And behind these developments are these various student apartment buildings that have been built in recent years, such as Theory on the right. And then in this final before and after image, you see on the right here, the former home of the Spark Art Space, and on the left, the northeast corner of the Theory student apartment building. And between those below, I built these two new buildings, framing a new pedestrian alley through the block that leads into Market Square. And as well, in the foreground, you can see one of the parklets that I've been talking about in the parallel parking lane that helps activate the sidewalk here with an area of seating and tables. And I'll sort of end the first part of this presentation with a before and after view of this neighborhood as a whole. This is the existing condition of the neighborhood, where you have a lot of vacant and underutilized lots, as well as I-81 cutting through the area. And in my design for the neighborhood, this is the neighborhood after the highway's been removed and new development has been created. And just to walk you through what's in this image, at the bottom left corner is downtown. Here's the Canal District, and then the project goes up Washington Street until it hits the Almond Street corridor. And then there's the new Almond Street Park in front of the Center of Excellence building, which extends through this public space here down to the former AME Zion Church, which is extended across that space here to become the new neighborhood school. Going further up, we hit Market Square up here and its various spaces that branch off of it. And then further up to the right, there's a pedestrian alley this way that extends to Ormond Spencer Park. Some other notable features in the neighborhood that remain to help you get oriented as to where this is. Here in this corner is Firefighters Park. This here is Foreman Park with the Crown Plaza Hotel behind it. And this here is the Theory student apartment building. And in addition to these still views, I've also created a video walkthrough through the neighborhood consisting of 3 different video clips. The first starts at South Crouse Avenue and East Fayette Street, goes to the northwest, then goes west down East Washington Street until it's just past Townsend Street, and then goes northwest towards the new Canal District at the intersection of Erie Boulevard and South State Street. The next video clip starts at East Genesee Street and Irving Avenue, goes north to the intersection with East Washington Street, and then goes down a series of public spaces and new alleys I've created until you hit Ormond Spencer Park. And then the third video clip that I've included is starting right in front of the former AME Zion Church, going down the new space I've created to the west of it, up to the north, right in front of the Center of Excellence, and then walking down the path underneath the Center of Excellence. So before I play the video, which is 17 minutes long, if anyone wants to ask any questions before I begin that, please let me know.
Hi, just a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. My name is Yusuf. I'm from the NYCOU. I think it's a very interesting. Okay, great. I think it's a very interesting presentation. And I understand that you said that you engaged a variety of stakeholders. Just wanted to see and think through the visioning of this and making sure to incorporate those who have been historically displaced as each iteration of development has happened in Syracuse, and to what extent has your thesis thought through and tried to ensure that as you talk about development, that it's one inclusive, but also that there are some kind of safeguards to ensure that individuals that have been historically displaced gentrify out of these communities?
Right, so there's a few aspects to that. One aspect that I don't hit on in this project is more the policy side. That's a bit beyond the scope and beyond my expertise. But one of the most important things that I've done in this project to at least ensure that new development is done at small scales incrementally and by those with local ownership who are going to more likely be more engaged with the community, is to promote the idea of fine-grained development, which is saying that there should be more smaller scale buildings per block instead of one large scale block-wide building, which seems to be much of the current trend in development. But I'm arguing that the coarse-grained development, such as some of the recent apartment buildings that have gone up in the area, has sort of promoted consolidated power and lack of diversity, and has created a barrier for local ownership within the neighborhood. And in addition to that one design feature that I can definitely incorporate, as well as trying to sort of taper off the edges of the neighborhood into a scale that fits well with the surrounding communities. I would also encourage policy makers to incorporate their ideas as well. I just haven't included that specific piece in here.
Thank you.
All right, and unless there's any other questions at the moment, and I can take more questions later, I will continue on to the walkthrough video. Welcome to the 15th Ward North neighborhood in Syracuse from University Hill. To the left, we're passing the Theory Student Apartment Building as we walk north along South Crouse Avenue. Currently, we approach East Fayette Street, traversing upgraded streetscape designs with new materials, widened sidewalks, and plenty of trees planted in swales. The two buildings ahead frame a new pedestrian alley, Market Alley. This alley, in turn, frames a tower in the distance that's designed as an anchor to Market Square and as a new part of the new community center for the neighborhood. Market Square exists on the former site of the Kennedy Square housing development. The irregular curvature and angles of the buildings, their profiles, and their details, as well as other variety-inducing factors, creates interest as the pedestrian moves through the space. This picturesque movement in and around the irregular urban fabric reveals and conceals new aspects of the city through parallax. On the left, we pass a small public square within Market Alley, and a statue of the logo of the city of Syracuse. To the left of both is the new neighborhood grocery market building, intended to give everyone in this area access to fresh groceries by foot or bicycle. Up ahead, the paving pattern changes to a unique localized condition around this column with a stepped base, which is an activation point for social interaction within this part of Market Square. As we face the rest of Market Square ahead, we see a fountain surrounded by seating. And to the right, we see the main part of the community center building of this neighborhood. This new building contains meeting spaces, a health clinic, childcare, continuing education, and a branch library. Ahead is another part of the community center building. This contains visual and performing arts centers, as well as the outdoor stage that can host concerts, and a tower that acts as a visual anchor to Market Square, seen and viewed with parallax differently from many different angles and as a part of many varying picturesque urban compositions. As we continue forward past the crowd that faces the band on the stage and the market building to the left, we head towards Irving Avenue. In this portion, it is curved and widened to act as an entrance and exit to I-690 in the state's community grid design, now that I-81 would no longer connect to I-690. The curved and irregular profiles, shapes, and details of the buildings and streets here creates variety to keep the pedestrian intrigued as they move around spaces where new things that they have not yet seen are constantly revealed through parallax to keep them moving through that space with interest. On the left, we pass the westernmost seating area of Market Square. Up ahead, we see a series of bollards which mark the beginning of Washington Street, where we will be walking along for most of the remainder of this tour. To the right here, we pass the extant Peace Housing Building, which has a slight setback. As we walk along the south side of Washington Street, here to the right, we see a parallel parking lane, which contains various parklet insertions. These parklets are small activations of public space with things like bench swings, movable and fixed restaurant seating, and lounge areas. These parklets are crucially important to maintaining a lively streetscape. Up ahead, we encounter Foreman Avenue, which we will pass as we continue to walk west over an extension of the sidewalk here into the parallel parking lane. This decreases the amount of street width that the pedestrian must cross. Here, we see another way to activate the public space, with a conversation occurring on a row house stoop. We continue past that conversation, west on Washington Street. As we're talking about diversity of activating public space, one of the most important things to consider in designing a vibrant city is to create a wide variety of different mixed-use buildings of different styles, small street frontages, and varying designs. The purpose of this is to create an engaging pedestrian experience, but also an economic and residential diversity throughout the neighborhood, with a variety of ownership by different people. Small street frontages are especially important as fewer, larger block-sized buildings deaden the street, consolidate power, decrease diversity, and create a non-resilient urban monoculture. Up here on the left, we pass a small existing red brick office building. This is followed on the left by a linear public space on axis with the path underneath the Center of Excellence that leads towards the back of the former AME Zion Church, converted to a new neighborhood school. Right here, we're facing towards the Center of Excellence owned by Syracuse University. As we pass that building, and the new Almond Park in front of it, we face towards a series of arches and towers at the corners of buildings that signify the entrance and exit of the east side and downtown, which is delineated also by the Almond Street corridor, designed as the state's community grid replacement of the I-81 viaduct. Here, we cross a bike lane that was designed as part of the Almond Street corridor. As we continue west on Washington Street, this remains as one of the more typical tree-lined streets of this project, which also acts as the main corridor of this neighborhood. We see a variety of different types of narrow, buried storefronts, potentially housing diverse businesses with diverse peoples living and working above, with diverse, small local ownership made possible by the fine-grained character of this urbanism. This is a very important alternative to large, block-wide buildings that we see in certain development patterns, including in Syracuse, which concentrate power and starve neighborhoods of necessary residential and commercial diversity. Up here on the left, we pass a building that has a corner tower where South McBride Street meets Washington Street. Corner towers like this can act as local landmarks and placemaking monuments that give identity and imageability to the neighborhood. Throughout the 15th Ward North, existing buildings have been kept, such as these two buildings to the right, which are separated by a new gate that helps to close off the center of the block, making it more secure. The idea of keeping these existing buildings, such as these two, the red roof building on the left, and the red brick building up on the right, is to respect what currently exists in the neighborhood while adding value to what is already there, with a contextually respectful style and urban attitude. The neighborhood design doesn't start from scratch, but rather deals with current realities of the 15th Ward North. As we approach South Townsend Street up ahead, we see several existing buildings, such as the small tan building on the right corner. Off in the distance to the left, we see a tan brick tower, which is at the back of the Verizon building on Firefighters Park. Just here to the right, this cinder block building is the Jazz Central building, which currently exists in this neighborhood. On the left, we're also passing the extant Lewis and Tanner Paints. As we veer off to the right, we enter a newly designed pedestrian space, which is the Canal Walk, and leads to the new Canal District designed by the State Department of Transportation as part of the community grid, replacement for I-81. A variety of different types of spaces and profiles in this Canal Walk create a diversity of uses and visual experiences as one walks and spends time in and through this space. This rich variety keeps the pedestrian interested and engaged as new elements of the space and buildings are continually revealed through parallax as they continue walking through their environment. This Canal Walk is designed to speak to the heritage and the past of this city as a city of canals, industry, and salt. At this point, as we've gotten through most of the Canal Walk, we cross over Water Street facing towards the north, where we see the Canal District in the distance on the left as well as downtown, and directly in front of us we see Erie Boulevard with the I-690 viaduct in the distance. This is where the major sequence through the 15th Ward North ends. We now continue along the next sequence of this video, walking north on Irving Avenue from the corner of East Genesee Street. On the left are several existing buildings, such as the Irving and Syracuse Market. On the right, we have the Theory Student Apartment Building. As we cross Wellington Place, on the left, several row houses coexist with the slightly set back existing First Fruit Ministries building. Up ahead on the right is the pre-existing, newly renovated, and added to Uncommon Apartments building, historically known as the Sylvester. On the left, we see one row house with a round corner which mediates the stoop setback. We now approach a more mixed-use area beyond the row houses. On the left, the blue glass building is the extant Upstate Biotech Accelerator building owned by Upstate Medical. Here we cross Irving Avenue and then East Fayette Street to the northeast, then walking north along the west side of the new grocery market building towards Market Square. And throughout this procession, the profile of trees, vehicles in the parallel parking lane, and various buildings, as well as the low profile of Market Square, conceal and reveal aspects of the urban space ahead of us, including Market Square Tower. These profiles work to achieve this effect of parallax in cooperation with irregular curved streets, such as this one, which is an extension of Irving Avenue into what is currently the parking lot of Upstate Medical's Upstate Biotech Accelerator, and this wide street is included in the state's community grid design leading up to the entrance and exit that are newly created for I-690, now that it will no longer connect to I-81. To a smaller scale than of the urbanism at large, parallax is at work here as the columns of the market's loggia conceal and reveal the market and its activity behind, as the pedestrian perceives the columns as moving faster than what is behind them. As we move past the market building, Market Square is slowly revealed. Here we are at the corner of Washington Street, which is pedestrian at this spot, and Irving Avenue. We veer east towards the new community center building. We walk around the Market Square column, first facing southeast down Market Alley towards East Fayette Street and South Crouse Avenue. We turn to face eastward, where an iconic turret guides us through a narrow pedestrian alley, which is bordered by civic and economic realm buildings, which create a picturesque framed view of this tower. As we continue forward down this alley, the irregular corners and shapes of this space in which we walk reveal new elements of the next space in our sequence through parallax. The purpose of this corner tower guiding us through the alley was to bring our attention to this second alley, Ormond Spencer Alley, another pedestrian alley that has been created in this neighborhood, designed to lead us to the currently existing Ormond Spencer Park, to end the park's current state of underutilization. As we pass South Crouse Avenue between Washington and Water Street, we continue forward, with our focus pointed towards the park ahead. As most of the public spaces designed by this project have been quite hardscaped, Ormond Spencer Park acts as a green oasis in Syracuse's urban core, with sports facilities, lawns, trees, and play spaces that this neighborhood can also take advantage of to be a more complete and livable community. Towards the end of this street, the buildings slowly taper down to meet a scale more appropriate to the adjacent neighborhood. And as we near the end of this alley, the vista of the park expands to become our entire view. We now enter the final sequence of this video. On the left, we pass Fayette Place and the Crown Plaza Garage, both extant, and on the right we pass the renovated AME Zion Church at 711 East Fayette Street, which has been extended to become a neighborhood school, with this brick structure on the other side of a newly created cloister containing a playground. This complex is designed and named in honor of Reverend Jermaine Logan, who operated this church as an important part of the Underground Railroad. On the left, we pass a pre-existing warehouse currently in the neighborhood. As we pass the first half of the cloister and its playground, we see on the right an existing red brick office building and a small public space in front of it. This path sequence has been on axis, with the path leading under Syracuse University's Center of Excellence up ahead. As we cross East Washington Street, just east of Almond Street, facing northwest, we now walk through the newly designed Almond Park with a lawn, plantings, and a fountain-focused hardscaped area. In the far right, we see a red brick pre-existing U-Haul building, an original Erie Canal warehouse. As we wrap up this final sequence, walking beneath the Center of Excellence, we now see the vibrant, diverse, and walkable future that awaits Syracuse's 15th Ward North community. I just remembered I got one question earlier in the chat, and that question was, how would you respond to criticism where this kind of architectural development is labeled as kitsch? And there's really two parts to my response to that. Sort of the first part relates to the history of the identity of the community of Syracuse and how part of that identity can be defined by the architecture in this city. And I see this project and its new architecture as sort of continuing and evolving some of those traditions of the architecture in Syracuse's past to build upon that existing identity instead of trying to completely reinvent it and clashing with what's already there. The other part of it is that I believe that more detailed building exteriors like you might find in some of the traditional and historic buildings in Syracuse create a better pedestrian experience by creating a sense of discovery as people move towards old buildings and discover smaller scale details more and more as they get closer to the buildings, as opposed to some more modern buildings which don't really have that same effect, using a minimalist design. And I am not claiming that these historically inspired buildings are the only way to achieve that effect. I don't think they are, but I just see it as one way to continue that tradition and keeping the pedestrian interested in that way. And the next question is, wouldn't this kind of magnitude of transformation require a strong central planning? That's a question from Alexis. And my answer to that question would be that there would certainly have to be some central planning in terms of two factors of this neighborhood. And one of those factors is relating to this drawing, this series of drawings here that I created about the sort of potential zoning code for this area. And that's one of the areas where I see central planning as ensuring that there is zoning in place that that promotes walkability and fine-grained development and many of the other factors I've talked about. The other aspect of central planning I would view would be certain buildings in this project, such as the community center building that I've designed here, as well as the neighborhood school that I've designed as a renovation in addition to the former AME Zion Church. But for the rest of the buildings, the mixed-use residential and commercial buildings, I don't view those as something that should be built exactly as I've designed them. I sort of view what I've designed there more as a suggestion and a template, but I think that those should be more left up to incremental, fine-grained, small, local, private development. And that part would require government oversight, but it wouldn't require top-down planning for most of the buildings. And if there's any more questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I've really enjoyed presenting this. I hope you enjoyed as well. And if you want to look back at any of these drawings or the video or my thesis document later on, all of that is available at my website, which is baxterhankin.com/15th-ward-north. And this presentation isn't yet up there, but it will be relatively soon. All right, without further questions, I suppose that concludes the presentation. Thank you all for tuning in.